Your bones are quietly dissolving after 50, and calcium alone won't stop it. I want to give you a statistic that I believe every person over 50 in America deserves to hear clearly, and that most have never been told directly. 1 in 2 women over the age of 50 will experience a bone fracture related to osteoporosis in their remaining lifetime. 1 in 4 men will as well. A hip fracture in a person over 70 carries a 1-year mortality rate of up to 25%. Not from the break itself, from the cascade of immobility, muscle loss, blood clots, infection, and physiological decline that follows. And here's the part that matters most for what we are doing today. By the time a fracture occurs, significant bone loss has typically been underway for 10 to 15 years without a single symptom. Osteoporosis is called a silent disease not as a metaphor. It is silent. No pain, no warning, no signal of any kind until the day something breaks. The standard medical response, a DEXA scan in your 60s, a prescription for a bisphosphonate if the numbers are low enough, addresses the problem after it has already become significant. It is reactive medicine applied to a condition that is entirely amenable to proactive intervention, beginning in your 50s or even your late 40s, when the bone biology is still responding robustly to the right inputs. The science of bone health after 50 is dramatically richer and more actionable than the calcium and vitamin D conversation most people have had. Today, I am going to give you the complete picture, the biology of bone loss, the specific drivers that accelerate it after 50, and the evidence-based protocol that goes well beyond what a standard checkup ever covers. We will dive into all of that in today's episode. I am Dr. Alexander Wellrich. Bone health sits at the intersection of every topic we have covered in this series. Estrogen and testosterone, our last episode, are primary regulators of bone density. Inflammation, episode 3, drives osteoclast activity, the cellular mechanism of bone breakdown. Vitamin D, which we have discussed across multiple episodes, is foundational to calcium absorption and bone mineralization. Muscle mass, episode 5, is mechanically essential to bone maintenance through the load-bearing signals that tell bone to stay dense. And mitochondria, episode 1, power the osteoblasts, the cells responsible for building new bone. Bone is not static tissue. It is one of the most metabolically active organs in your body, constantly being broken down by osteoclasts and rebuilt by osteoblasts in a process called remodeling. In youth, this balance tilts toward building. After 50, it tilts toward breakdown, progressively, measurably, and silently. The science is clear that this tilt is not fixed. It is influenced by the same dietary, hormonal, mechanical, and lifestyle inputs that govern every other system we have discussed. My goal today is to give you a protocol that is sophisticated enough to actually work, not the oversimplified calcium and exercise advice that leaves most people no better protected than before they have the conversation. If this kind of thorough, evidence-based discussion is valuable to you, please subscribe to this channel. And now, let us talk about the organ you cannot see that is determining whether you stay independent in the decades ahead. Let me start with the biology because understanding the mechanism is what makes the interventions make sense. Your skeleton is in a constant state of remodeling. Osteoclasts, bone-resorbing cells, continuously excavate microscopic sections of bone, removing old or damaged tissue. Osteoblasts, bone-building cells, follow behind, filling those excavations with new collagen matrix that then mineralizes with calcium and phosphate to form dense, strong bone. In young adults, this cycle is tightly coupled. Resorption and formation are roughly balanced, and bone mineral density is maintained or even increases through the mid-30s. After the mid-30s, the balance begins to shift. The coupling between resorption and formation becomes less tight. Osteoclast activity starts to outpace osteoblast activity. And several specific hormonal and biological changes after 50 dramatically accelerate this imbalance. The most significant is estrogen loss at menopause. Estrogen is the primary brake on osteoclast activity. It suppresses the production of rank ligand, the molecular signal that activates osteoclasts, and promotes osteoclast apoptosis, meaning the natural death of those resorbing cells. When estrogen falls sharply at menopause, this brake is released. Osteoclast activity surges. In the 5 to 7 years immediately following menopause, women can lose between 20 and 30% of their bone mineral density. Research published in the New England Journal of Medicine described this as the most rapid period of bone loss in human life outside of early infancy. Not gradual, rapid. In men, the process is slower but equally real. Testosterone supports bone density both directly and through its conversion to estrogen in bone tissue. As testosterone declines after 50, gradually at approximately 1 to 2% per year, bone loss accelerates, particularly in cortical bone, the dense outer shell of long bones most relevant to fracture resistance. Beyond hormones, chronic inflammation is the second major driver. The same inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-1, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, that we have discussed throughout this series as drivers of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and chronic pain, also directly stimulate osteoclast production and activity. A study published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research found that adults with elevated hs-CRP, the systemic inflammation marker, had significantly lower bone mineral density and higher fracture risk than those with low hs-CRP. Reducing inflammation is bone protection. And gut health, our second episode topic, connects directly. Calcium absorption from the gut depends on vitamin D, but it also depends on gut microbiome composition and intestinal health. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that gut microbiome diversity was positively correlated with bone mineral density in postmenopausal women. The gut-bone axis is an emerging area of research with clear, practical implications. Protecting gut health through fermented foods, plant diversity, and fiber is simultaneously protecting your bones. Let me address calcium directly because the conventional narrative around calcium and bone health is both oversimplified and in some respects misleading, and I want you to have an accurate picture. Calcium is necessary for bone mineralization, that is not in dispute. But the relationship between calcium supplementation and fracture prevention is considerably more nuanced than the decades of public health messaging have suggested. A landmark meta-analysis published in the BMJ, analyzing data from over 12,000 participants across multiple randomized controlled trials, found that calcium supplementation alone did not significantly reduce fracture risk. Not only that, but several large studies, including the Women's Health Initiative, found that calcium supplement use in older women was associated with a modest but measurable increase in cardiovascular events, potentially due to calcium being deposited in arterial walls rather than bone when the cofactors needed to direct it to bone are absent. The critical point is that calcium is only one brick in the bone-building structure. Without the cofactors that direct it appropriately, additional calcium circulates in the bloodstream and may deposit in tissues where it does not belong. The primary directors are vitamin D3 and vitamin K2. Vitamin D3 is essential for calcium absorption from the gut. Without adequate vitamin D, you absorb approximately 10 to 15% of dietary calcium. With adequate vitamin D, that rises to 30 to 40%. A meta-analysis published in the Lancet found that vitamin D and calcium together significantly reduced fracture risk compared to calcium alone. The D is not optional, it is mechanistically necessary. Vitamin K2, specifically the MK7 form, is the cofactor that activates two proteins critical for directing calcium into bone rather than soft tissue. Osteocalcin, which incorporates calcium into the bone matrix, and matrix GLA protein, which actively removes calcium from arterial walls. A study published in Osteoporosis International found that MK7 supplementation over 3 years significantly improved bone strength and reduced the rate of bone loss in postmenopausal women. Research from the Netherlands published in Thrombosis and Hemostasis found that vitamin K2 supplementation reduced arterial calcification over 3 years. Calcium, D3, and K2 form a triad. Any approach to bone health that addresses only one of the three is incomplete. Magnesium is the fourth essential element in this picture. Approximately 60% of the body's magnesium is stored in bone, where it is incorporated into the hydroxyapatite crystal structure that gives bone its density and resilience. Magnesium deficiency, common in adults over 50, impairs the activity of vitamin D by reducing its conversion to the active form. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that magnesium intake was positively associated with bone mineral density in both men and women across multiple age groups. A few years ago, I worked with a patient I will call Ellen. She was 61, a former high school teacher from Minneapolis, Minnesota. She had come in for a general health review, and as part of that review, we performed a DEXA scan, a bone density measurement she had not had since her early 50s. The results showed T-scores of -2.1 at the hip and -2.4 at the lumbar spine, placing her solidly in the osteoporosis range without ever having had a fracture or a symptom. Ellen was shocked. She had been taking a calcium supplement for years. She walked regularly. She thought she had been doing the right things. When we reviewed the details, the gaps were clear. Her vitamin D was at 19 nanograms per milliliter, significantly deficient. She had never taken vitamin K2. Her magnesium intake was inadequate. She had been sedentary beyond walking, no resistance training whatsoever. Her HS-CRP was 3.8, indicating systemic inflammation. And she was 7 years post-menopause with no hormone evaluation. We built a comprehensive bone protocol, optimizing all 4 nutritional cofactors, initiating a resistance training program, addressing inflammation, and opening a conversation with her gynecologist about hormone status. At her 2-year follow-up DEXA, her hip T-score had improved from -2.1 to -1.6, and her lumbar spine from -2.4 to -1.9. Measurable, documented improvement in bone density without a bisphosphonate. The biology had responded to being given what it actually needed. And here is the additional layer that most bone health conversations never reach: the role of mechanical loading and why the specific type of exercise matters enormously for bone density in ways that walking alone cannot provide. Bone responds to mechanical stress through a process called Wolff's Law. The principle, established in the 19th century and confirmed by modern molecular biology, that bone remodels in response to the loads placed upon it. Bone cells called osteocytes detect mechanical strain and signal osteoblasts to build denser bone in response. This means that the type of mechanical stimulus matters enormously. Bone requires impact and resistance, forces that create meaningful strain through the skeletal structure. Walking provides some stimulus, but its relatively low impact and consistent, repetitive nature produces rapid skeletal adaptation, meaning the bone quickly accommodates to walking and the stimulus becomes insufficient for continued bone building. The exercise types with the strongest evidence for bone mineral density improvement are progressive resistance training and impact activities. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research found that progressive resistance training produced significant improvements in hip and spine bone density in postmenopausal women, the population with the highest risk and the greatest potential benefit. The key again is progressive overload, consistently increasing the challenge to keep providing the mechanical stimulus that triggers bone formation. Impact activities, jogging, jumping, tennis, dancing, provide the high-strain mechanical signals that best stimulate osteoblast activity. A study published in Osteoporosis International found that brief, targeted impact protocols, as simple as 10 jumps twice daily, produced measurable improvements in hip bone density in premenopausal women over 16 weeks. For adults over 50 with joint concerns, modified impact activities under physician guidance, step aerobics, low-impact jump rope modifications, dance exercise, can provide meaningful bone stimulus without excessive joint load. Balance and fall prevention training, yoga, tai chi, specific balance exercises, is the third pillar of bone protection, addressing not the density of bone, but the risk of the fall that breaks it. A Cochrane systematic review found that exercise programs focused on balance and functional training reduced fall rates by up to 23% in community-dwelling older adults. A fracture requires both a fragile bone and a fall. Addressing both simultaneously is the complete strategy. Let me cover the additional factors that research identifies as directly relevant to bone health after 50, both protective and harmful. Protein intake is more important for bone health than most people realize. Bone matrix is approximately 1/3 collagen, a protein. Adequate dietary protein provides the amino acids for collagen synthesis and for the production of growth factors that stimulate osteoblast activity. A systematic review published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that higher protein intake was positively associated with bone mineral density and inversely associated with fracture risk in older adults. The protein guidance from our muscle episode, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, is simultaneously a muscle recommendation and a bone recommendation. Collagen peptides specifically have emerging evidence for bone health. A randomized controlled trial published in Nutrients found that specific collagen peptide supplementation significantly increased bone mineral density at the spine and hip in postmenopausal women over 12 months compared to placebo. The proposed mechanism involves collagen peptide fragments stimulating osteoblast activity directly. A dose of 10 grams of hydrolyzed collagen daily was used in the strongest trials. On the harmful side, smoking is one of the most potent bone-depleting exposures identified in the research. A meta-analysis published in Calcified Tissue International found that smokers had significantly lower bone mineral density and a 25% higher fracture risk than non-smokers, even after controlling for other risk factors. The mechanisms include nicotine-mediated reduction in blood flow to bone, direct toxic effects on osteoblasts, and smoking-induced acceleration of estrogen metabolism. Excessive alcohol consumption reduces calcium absorption, suppresses bone formation, and increases fall risk simultaneously, a triple threat to skeletal integrity. The research consistently shows a dose-dependent relationship between alcohol intake and fracture risk. Certain medications, most notably corticosteroids, proton pump inhibitors, some anticonvulsants, and certain antidepressants, are associated with accelerated bone loss. This is not a reason to stop medications your physician has prescribed. It is a reason to have an explicit conversation about bone protection monitoring if you are on any of these medications long-term. Here is your bone protection protocol. 1. Get a DEXA scan if you have not had one within the last 2 years. Women should be screened starting at 65 by national guidelines, but for women with risk factors, menopause before 45, family history, low body weight, corticosteroid use, smoking history, screening should begin earlier. Ask for your T-score and track it over time. 2. Build the nutritional triad. Calcium from food sources primarily: dairy, sardines with bones, leafy greens, fortified plant milks, targeting 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams daily. Vitamin D3 supplemented to blood levels of 50 to 70 nanograms per milliliter. Vitamin K2 as MK7 at 100 to 200 micrograms daily. These three work together. Addressing any one without the others is incomplete. 3. Add magnesium glycinate at 300 to 400 milligrams daily. Magnesium is both a direct structural component of bone and essential for vitamin D activation. Most adults over 50 are not meeting the dietary requirement. 4. Begin progressive resistance training with specific attention to exercises that load the hip and spine: squats, deadlifts, step-ups, and rows. These are the bone sites most relevant to fracture risk and the ones that respond most powerfully to mechanical loading. 2 to 3 sessions per week is the evidence-supported minimum. 5. Reduce your systemic inflammatory load through the dietary and lifestyle changes from our inflammation episode. Inflammation drives osteoclast activity directly. Reducing your HSCRP is reducing your bone resorption rate. 6. Have your hormonal status evaluated with the thoroughness we discussed in our last episode. Estrogen in women and testosterone in men are the primary hormonal regulators of bone density. If deficiency is present and therapy is appropriate, bone protection is one of the most compelling evidence-based reasons for that conversation. Let me bring everything together. Osteoporosis is the most preventable catastrophic health event in the second half of life. It kills quietly through fractures, through the cascade of decline that follows immobility, and through a year-one mortality rate that rivals many cancers. And it is almost entirely preventable when addressed proactively with the full scientific toolkit. Not calcium supplements alone, not a DEXA scan at 65, but a comprehensive biological approach that addresses nutrition, hormones, inflammation, mechanics, and lifestyle simultaneously, beginning in your 50s. Ellen's bone density improved. Not because we found a new drug, because we gave her skeleton what it had been asking for and not receiving. The biology responded. It always does when given what it needs. You have the framework now: the nutritional triad, the mechanical loading principle, the hormonal and inflammatory connections, the specific tests to request, the steps to begin this week. Your skeleton is supporting you every moment of every day. The investment in supporting it back is one of the highest return health decisions you will ever make. If today's episode gave you something useful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone over 50 in your life. Leave me a comment. Tell me whether you have had a bone density scan and what your result was. I read every single comment. In our next episode, we are going to talk about something that most people think they understand, but almost no one is doing optimally: hydration. Not water for thirst. Water as a metabolic tool. What dehydration at even mild levels does to your brain, your kidneys, your blood pressure, and your energy after 50. And why the hydration needs of the aging body are fundamentally different from what most people assume. Until then, take care of yourself from the inside out.